Welcome into the College Football Show SEC Conference. We're previewing the West Division. We got Robbie, Veno, Ralph, Michaels from WagerTalk and Sports Memo. Guys in the chat box, come join us and throw out any questions you got about the SEC West. And hopefully we'll get some answers. We'll be previewing each and every team and a look ahead towards the season. Ralph Michaels at Cal Sports LV on Twitter, WagerTalk.com. Welcome in, buddy.
2 days until real sports. I can't wait.
It's game week. It absolutely is. We're talking football. And Ralph, obviously you're talking about MLB, but you're excited, right?
Yeah, I know. We're going to be talking to Robbie in a second. Robbie's done a lot more pre-work. I'm one to sort of watch games and play on situations after they occur. So, I know Robbie's done a lot of great work. So let's shoot it to him so everyone has plenty of time to get over to WagerTalk and buy his MLB season win total report.
Absolutely. Robbie Veno at Rob Veno Sports. He's got his MLB season win total. He's got 3 plays, I believe, with analysis on the shortened season here, guys. Just 60-game season. He's got 3 plays. I'd check it out. You get the analysis. And he's also got a play up for opening night, right, Robbie?
I do. The doubleheader on Thursday night, obviously, as Ralph said, will bring us live sports once again, which is fantastic. I've been watching a little of the preseason stuff or the exhibition or the spring training, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, guys, it'll be nice. It'll be nice. A week behind that will be NBA, and maybe we can get rolling here normal once again.
Robbie, I got a question on baseball. I know this is football and guys want to hear SEC, but how much of your report when you handicap this year changed because you're only playing your division foes 10 times each and your non-division and the opposite AL or NL games 4 times each for 20 games? Did strength of schedule play a lot to it, or are your teams based on who you really liked and then the schedule just tweaked it a little bit?
Yeah, I think the schedule predicated a lot of it, Ralph. I think when you
As
go
I thought
through
it would,
the East have – yeah, the East playing the East, the Central playing the Central, the West playing the West. It obviously makes a dramatic fundamental switch in how you're going to handicap these things. And, some divisions are in cluster. 4 teams in the NL East could win it. 4 teams in the NL Central could win it. And then when you cross over and play those foes, I mean, certainly without getting in depth, the analysis is all there, guys, if you want to purchase. But yes. Short answer to the question, strength of schedule was heavily used in these decisions. Yeah.
And Robbie, I mean, some of this, it's like the, what's the team? The LA Angels. They have 26 games against the A's, the Astros, and the Dodgers out of 60. That's 3 of the top, 5 or 6 teams in all of MLB. That's really tough, man.
Yeah, and if you throw in teams like San Diego that everybody seems to be high on, I mean, I just don't know where Anaheim's pitching is going to come from, Drew, to dive into them a little bit. Certainly Rendon, the addition there, and Trout and the offense will be there. But, boy, game still needs pitchers, and the Angels just don't seem to have enough of them. Going to throw Ohtani once a week? Might not be enough.
All right, good stuff, guys. We got Brian, Elliott, Game Theory in the chat box. Welcome in, guys. We're talking SEC West. Throw out any questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get answers out to you. We're talking SEC West in order of finish of last year, top to bottom. We'll get all 7 teams done here, and hopefully the next 50 minutes or so. So we got LSU up first, Ralph, and of course LSU. If you don't know how their season ended last year, you're probably watching the wrong show. The defending national champions, 8-5 during the regular season ATS. I got them 9-5, or actually 10-5 in terms of overall against the number last year. Also an over trender as well, Ralph. Obviously, to live up to last year's expectations, going to be rough for the Bayou Bengals, but it's more of the reloading instead of rebuilding there on the Bayou. Are you looking to be betting on LSU this upcoming year?
Yeah, despite them last year having the number 5 recruiting class and this year having the number 4 recruiting class, they're not going to be able to bounce back like Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State does. You are returning only 8 starters, 3 on the offense, 5 on the defense. You are number 127 in returning experience. And I tweeted out today, for those that may have not seen the draft recap I did, I do a weighted point system, 7 points for first, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. LSU has the most points lost in a draft in the history of the NFL draft. So they had 5 first-round players drafted from a 6-year period from 2013 to 2018. They had 5 first-round draft choices last year. They just have too much of a gap to overcome. I do have them still second in the division, but if they finish 4th behind A&M and Auburn, it wouldn't surprise me at all this year. You know, you're looking at 8 games as a double-digit favorite and 4 games between the threes. So when you're looking at those games between the threes, that's who they have to beat. But very healthy last year. They started a lot of juniors and a lot of seniors. 76% of their starts were upperclassmen. The schedule played out great where they were +3 in close wins. All of that has me falling back. It was nice to see the offense, but to me, it was a one-year wonder where Alabama wasn't the best team in the division or the best team in the conference. I think Bama's back there, and I have LSU dropping 2 games in the regular season, and the third one is one of those games I have as a toss-up.
And Robbie, how do you feel about the Bayou Bengals this upcoming year?
Yeah, Ralph talked about the potential negatives from a personnel standpoint, but let's talk about the coaching as well, guys, because we didn't get into this when we did our coaching stuff. Dave Aranda, gone, now head coach of Baylor. In comes Bo Pelini. As far as defensive philosophies go, these guys couldn't be more polar opposite. I mean, Dave Aranda runs a 3-4 that generally is more a thinking man's defense, a more cerebral defense, whereas Bo Pelini, as we all know, is a 4-3 guy, attack, blitz, pressure, man-to-man on the corners. And that defense, while it really clicked when he was with LSU back in the early to mid 2000s, it sort of failed as time went on with these new offenses, with a lot of misdirection, a lot of the RPO stuff, and his teams have been caught over pursuing because they're so aggressive. So we'll see. I mean, again, Ralph talked about this last week where coaches are concerned. Rob, do you ever hear a coach say, hell, our team's going to stink this year? And the same with the players. The players, when they get a coordinator switch, always love to change at first. But when you're limited in spring practice, when the overhaul to the playbook and the on-field execution is so drastic as it is between Aranda and Pelini, I don't know, guys. You combine the personnel losses that they had with this switch, and I don't know the defense, and it wasn't good to start the year either. Some of it due to injury. At the end of the year, the LSU defense came on and played a little bit better, but they weren't good to begin with. I could see some flaws there, and I don't know how much of a difference this will make, guys, but I felt like I needed to note it. Joe Brady was the guy who came in and basically directed that passing scheme last year. I know that Ensminger is the offensive coordinator, but Joe Brady had an awful lot to do with that passing offense. He's moved on with Matt Rule to Carolina. Scott Linehan's an NFL guy who steps in to take his place. Will his play calling be the same as a 30-year-old? There's an age gap there. I'm not sure. I just, you switch from Joe Burrow to Miles Brennan, highly touted. We haven't seen enough of him to really know what he can do over a 12-game schedule or however many games they play. So you're in the rugged SEC West, guys. I just think that too many signals point to a downward, to some downward movement for the LSU Tigers here. Still a good team, but not last year's team for sure.
Drew, I want to throw in, we'll take care of the business early. We, every time we talk about spring practices, this one's easy. LSU has had 3. That's it in the entire division. They're the only ones that have any practices. They've had 3 practices. So, give them a half of a check mark being ahead of a few guys for getting on the field 3 times.
Yeah, no, it's wild how that's going to work out this year in the SEC West. I mean, you guys kind of both pointed towards it in terms of LSU's got a lot to come up, because you start talking about this division and, there's some heavy hitters, and we're going to get to them now. I mean, next team up here, we got Alabama, finishing second in the SEC West. We haven't said that very often in the last decade or so. 10-2 in the regular season. ATS just 6-6, 7-5 trenders there towards the over. Interesting, Robbie. I know you know this. Nick Saban, obviously one of the best coaches. You can make the argument in college football history, but ATS not so much. Not as interested in covering point spreads. It seems he'll kind of take the foot off the gas there at times towards the end of the season. But overall, how do you feel with Alabama bouncing back this year? And I say bouncing back, I mean they were 10-2 in the regular season, but still not making it to the playoffs. Robbie, what do you thinking about the Crimson Tide this upcoming year?
Well, contrary to a lot of the teams in this division, Alabama's got stability finally. It seems like every year there's a coordinator or two picked off of Nick Saban's staff, and he's got the same guys this year. He's got Steve Sarkisian running his offense, and he's got Pete Golding running the defense. So I like the stability factor, especially when it comes to, as Ralph pointed out, 0 spring practices. And these guys know the playbook. They know how to execute the playbook. So for a team like Alabama, maybe not as drastic a problem as it would be for other teams that are trying to convert different schemes. This team's in as good a shape as anybody in the West, and I really see them as being the kingpin of this division. Once again this year, they have 4 returning offensive linemen. Mack Jones, while he's not listed as a returning starter, Mack Jones got to play quarterback in some high-pressure games. And for that reason, I would almost consider him a returning starter. You can't get any more pressure than what was put on this kid when Tua went down last year. So Mack Jones, I think he's proved his worth. Like I say, 4 offensive linemen returning. On the defensive side, 4 of the front 7 are back. And interesting, guys, so much was made in the draft of the 2 wide receivers, right? Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs. Both guys drafted incredibly high in the first round. I think Jeudy went 15th and Ruggs went 11th. You would think there's some slack off there, but boy, Alabama had 4 potential number 1 wide receivers in that lineup last year. And so to take their place is just Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle will be almost the identical duo as the other guys were last year. Najee Harris at running back. The offense should be as explosive as ever. To your point about point spread covering, Drew, and I looked at this from a first half, second half perspective, because there's a lot of games in recent years where second half you could play against Alabama because Nick Saban just really wouldn't care to run up scores. But overall last year, they're a 6-6 team as far as second half plays are concerned. So they did do a little bit more damage in the second half last year, point spread wise, than they've done in the past. And they were 7-6 overall against the number last year. So good numbers considering Alabama, really. I think, like I say, guys, offensively and defensively, I think they're set. Coaching wise, I think they're set. LSU being a little bit down. To me, they're clearly the number 1 team in this division, and it'll come down to them in Georgia. I think they play, interestingly enough, the 3rd game of the season is Alabama and Georgia, which you could list that as an early battle for SEC supremacy. Their crossover games, you get 2 when you're in the SEC, home against Georgia, as I just mentioned, at Tennessee. The back half of their schedule, the final third, does include LSU, Texas A&M, Auburn. That's the hardest part of their divisional schedule. But I think Alabama can handle all challengers.
Great breakdown there, Robbie. I mean, Ralph, he brought up a bunch of great points in terms of Alabama kind of maybe taking a step up here. I agree with him. I mean, the continuity at the coordinator positions is going to help this year more so than ever. And it's almost like Alabama never has that in past years. So I think that's really going to help the Crimson Tide this year, Ralph.
No question. I do want to mention one loss, which is a big loss, but it's probably less important this year. They lost their strength and conditioning coach, Scott Cochran. He actually went to Georgia. And for those that don't know, you ask Ohio State, you ask Clemson, you ask Alabama, the elite teams, their strength and conditioning coach could be the second most important per coach on the team behind, the head coach. They don't get enough love, but they're the only coach that's allowed to talk to a player every day. They're allowed to talk about conditioning. They're allowed to talk about diet. They touch bases with these kids in the summer when the normal coaches can't. But again, this year is a little bit different, so we'll see how that plays out. But it is a big loss for their coaching staff. One thing, I think Alabama is the perfect scenario why you have to look at returning starters in a period of years. If you look at Alabama and you say, well, they only have 12 returning starters, that's not great. If you look at Alabama in the last 6 years, they have returned 12, 10, 11, 11, 10, and 12. So instead of saying they only return 12 starters, I can say, well, in the last 6 years, when they've won multiple championships, they're returning as many starters as their championship seasons. So again, when you're looking at a team, you have to look at what they had coming back for multiple seasons to know if it's a positive, a negative, or an equal to last year when you're evaluating the talent. Rob talked about the wide receivers. Yeah, they have 2 more number 1 draft picks. They have a great running back. They have a top 3 probably offensive line in all of football. You have those type of situations in place. There's a lot of people that can play quarterback. When you have Najee Harris and you have those 2 wide receivers and you have the best O-line. So Mack Jones is just stepping into a great situation. Schedule-wise, yes, they play Georgia week 3, but they get him at home. I have them a 9.6 favorite. When they go to LSU on November the 7th, I have them as a 4-point favorite. So their average line this year, 23.4 is their average line if you add all 12 games. Take out the USC game, that's going to make it even go higher with the Pac-12 playing. So Bama's going to be a double-digit favorite in 10 games, a small favorite in 1, and the LSU game. So, that's their lowest line. I think they win the division. I think they go undefeated. I think they have a chip on their shoulder. This is the first time they've missed the playoffs since we've gone to the new 4-team format in 2014. I think it's a circle the wagons. You look at their games last year, that LSU game, they only lost it by 5. They only got outgained by 18 yards. That Auburn game, now they have revenge. They went to Auburn. They had a 515 to 354 yard edge. They were -1 turnover, lose that game by 3. I think it's circle the wagons. I think you can, depending on what the new lines are without the USC game, even if they were playing USC and the total was 10.5, I would be very comfortable betting the over. I think they sweep the board this year. Clearly, a team to be reckoned with. I have them as the number 3 power rated team, right behind Clemson and Ohio State.
I like it, Ralph. So pretty high here, guys, on Alabama. Ralph, coming up to you with the next team here, talking about that Auburn game last year. It was a wild one to end the season, pretty much keeping Alabama out of the playoffs, like you talked about, and talk about, matchups that have given Nick Saban a little bit of trouble here. I mean, Gus Malzahn's beat him 2 of the last 3 years, 3-4 overall record against Saban-led Alabama teams. So Auburn a little bit getting Alabama's number compared to other teams. I mean, still under 500 under his reign, but Auburn last year, 9-4, tough bowl outing there against Minnesota. But outside of that, I mean, that defensive line, one of the best in the country that I can remember in quite some time. They're going to lose both defensive tackles off of that in the first 40 picks of the NFL draft. Last year, Auburn was making money for their backers, Ralph. I got them at 9-3 ATS in the regular season, and also an undertrender with that good defense and the kind of lack of production at the quarterback position. You would look for that to kind of get better going from freshman to sophomore year, but under Gus Malzahn, that tends to be a trend to kind of follow here. But still, they lose a lot on defense, and still question marks on how good the quarterback will be this upcoming year for Auburn, Ralph.
I like Bo Nix. I mean, you're talking now a sophomore, and starting as a freshman in the SEC is not easy. And to come away, he had a 16-6 ratio, only completed 57% of his passes. But on the offensive side, you're returning. You have you have only 4 starters back, so the O line's a problem, the D line's a problem. They have had a top 12 recruiting class for 10 straight years. I mean, that just shows the consistency Auburn has. 2 years ago, they were number 11. This year, they were number 7. Yeah, but they're going to need the help. Obviously, I'll let Rob talk about Chad Morris coming in as the OC. 9 returning starters is the second fewest in the SEC behind LSU. So that shows you that what they have to replace. You talked about the defensive line. They lost 4 players to the NFL on the defensive side. That's very tough to replace. The schedule, you have to go to Georgia. You have to go to Alabama this year. You have to go to Mississippi State. So to me, it's one of the toughest schedules on the board. You have a home game against North Carolina. We'll see if that plays out. That's a losable game week 2 when you're playing them September 17th. So I think they're going to actually switch. I think they're actually going to be more of an over team this year. I think Bo Nix gets the ability to throw the ball more. And when I look at their schedule, they get the ability to again, Alcorn State, everything is in flux now with these non-conference games because a couple conferences are talking about going to spring. But again, the North Carolina game, if they play that, is going to be a test. I have them as a loss. The Georgia game, the road game, is a loss. The A&M game is a pick'em game. The LSU game at home is a pick'em game. They go to Alabama. I think Bama gets revenge on them. But you want to talk about a pair of tough to buff back-to-backs. October 10th and 17th at Georgia, home to A&M, and November 21st and 28th, home to LSU and at Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, Robbie, Ralph ended it with the schedule talk there with Auburn, and if you've been following Auburn, really any SEC West team, but especially the Auburn Tigers, they got a tough schedule each and every year, man. Interested to hear your thoughts on Chad Morris coming in and how that's going to work with Gus Malzahn. Similar offenses, but you would think it's a benefit, right, Robbie?
I think it can be for sure. It's funny with Gus Malzahn, Drew, and of course you are as close to Auburn or closer to Auburn than any of us here on this show. But it's interesting to me how this game day play calling assignment has just been like a hot potato the last 3 years. Gus Malzahn wants it, he gives it away. Gus Malzahn wants it back, he gives it away. Here it's all Chad Morris. He's going to call the plays. It's his offense. Like you said, they're similar in style. Couple of differences. I mean, obviously, they're up-tempo spreads. Both of these guys, Malzahn and Morris, want to go fast. Morris adds a lot more passing into the spread than Gus Malzahn. When Gus Malzahn's spread is working on all cylinders, it's got a running threat at quarterback, and they're running the football power-wise and big play-wise. But here with Chad Morris, RPO-based spread system, the quarterback throws a lot more, not just to wide receivers, but they utilize backs, they utilize tight ends. I think at Clemson, I was reading 2 years at Clemson, tight ends had 97 catches and 18 touchdowns. In college football, guys, we watch it every single week and a ton of games every single week. Teams that use the tight end, in college football, that guy's generally wide open. So it's a particular position that you can capitalize on. I think Chad Morris will. Those are really the only differences here. Morris will call plays. Morris will call more RPOs. Morris will throw the ball a little bit more. Should help Bo Nix. Here's the problem. Ralph and you both talked about the defensive line, Drew, and the losses that were there, Derek Brown and company. But you combine that with 4 new starters in the secondary. Now, I get it. These guys have all played a little bit, and most reports say they can handle the task. But there's 2 new corners. There's 2 new safeties. And when you take a defensive line and take a couple pieces from it, important pieces from it, and then you take a secondary and take 4 starters away from it, early on, that could represent trouble. If Ralph didn't say it, I would have. North Carolina could be a nightmare matchup early if these two don't come together. We talked last week about how pass rush, I forget what team it was, but pass rush and secondary are hand and glove fit when you have both. You're a tremendous defense. If you have one good unit and the other's a little shaky, they can cover for each other. Here, Auburn has to start out the season with no spring practices and 2 units that have been hit pretty hard by graduation and defections to the NFL. So North Carolina, which can throw the ball, could be trouble. I think Lane Kiffin's play calling, not that Mississippi's going to win the game, but I think Lane Kiffin has a ton of weapons down there offensively, and he may score points on Auburn as well the following week. So for Auburn, I like what Ralph said. I would lean toward over with this team. I think Bo Nix, it's tough to say, guys, definitively, but I think he's seasoned enough to maybe overcome some of the offensive line losses. They only have one returning offensive lineman, but Nix is mobile, and maybe Morris can find ways to cover for what will be a new offensive line, at least 80% new. To me, Auburn better, as good offensively, not as good defensively early on. So I would look to overs early on. That Georgia game is going to be tough. And Ralph obviously talked about the pairs of back-to-backs that they have. It's a good football team, guys, but I see problems on that defense early because you're replacing defensive line and secondary members.
I just wanted to add one more thing. This is the year you don't want to lose defensive backs. Because, Bo Nix, decent. Mack Jones, decent. Mon from A&M, good. You have Costello at Mississippi State. You have, Lane Kiffin and Matt Corral throwing it around. You are throwing the ball around this year in the SEC West more than you probably any season that we know of in the last 20 years. So if there's one season you don't want to be bereft in defensive backs, this is the year. And unfortunately, this is the year Auburn is.
Yeah, and Ralph, to kind of piggyback off that and talking about Auburn, and you guys both hit on this, with Auburn, they have good recruiting. So it's not like it's going to be a desert field at the defensive line, defensive back position, Ralph. But there's just question marks there because you lost so much top line talent, especially at that defensive tackle position, man. That's what I'm most worried about with the Auburn Tigers. It's just, you could see them having success on the defensive end, right? Or no, you think they're definitely taking a big step back?
Right now, if you look at the starting 4 on the defensive line, you're talking Anderson, who's a senior. You're talking Tisdale, who's a senior. You're talking they're going to play. They're going to play a 3-4. But you got 2 senior ends, and you got a sophomore Hill who's played some in the middle as the nose tackle, who's 306 pounds. So you do have. It's different having no returning. It's different having fewer returning starters when your non-returning starters are seniors and have been in the system. So yes, it is correct that they've recruited very well. They did have a lot of depth, so they're not like having to play a very young team. In fact, I only think there's probably only going to be 2 underclassmen starters this year on the defensive side. So you are going to have a very senior-laden squad, which can help you go through the lack of starting experience.
Yeah, especially when those seniors, it's like, oh, why didn't they play more? And, well, you look at who they just lost before them, and you can kind of tell. So it's kind of a little bit tough to tell how much of a drop-off there will be there with the Auburn Tigers. Guys, next team up, Robbie, we got Texas A&M, the Aggies, 7-5 last year in the regular season. I got them also 7-5 ATS, 5-7, sort of under trenders a little bit here, Robbie. And talking about Texas A&M, it's almost like they got a little bit of a profile of kind of being hyped up in the beginning and then not really living up to expectations. Aggies fans out there maybe a little bit not agreeing with what I'm saying, but it just has that feel since they've kind of entered the SEC West here, Robbie. Not sure how you feel about that and what your thought is for 2020 with the Texas A&M Aggies.
I like them for a couple of reasons, Drew. First off, Jimbo Fisher's now in his third season. The kids on this roster are his recruits for the most part. 80% of them. He's had enough time now to put his style together. He's kept continuity in that coaching staff. Daryl Dickey, third season as offensive coordinator. Mike Elko, who came over from Wake Forest, third year as defensive coordinator. So everybody here is very familiar with the system. I like the coaching angle. I like the quarterback angle. Kellen Mond, who from his initial season to his second made as many strides positively in throwing the football as any quarterback I've ever seen. I mean, watching him in his first year, I didn't think he could hit the broadside of a barn. And then all of a sudden in his second year, the Clemson game happened where he threw for over 400 yards, and he's taken off ever since. Kellen Mond, a definite veteran leader. And here's the third thing I like. I often talk about the game in the trenches. If you just take a look at returning starters for Texas A&M, offensive line and defensive front seven, 9 of those 14 back. They're stacked on the offensive line with 4 starters. Their front seven is pretty well loaded as well. I think if ever there was an opportunity with LSU being somewhat down, where Auburn, I think you hit it perfectly, Drew. I don't think anybody's calling for the demise of Auburn, but that little cloud of question marks hangs over the defense's head and the offensive line's head. There's a lot of position groups there where you've lost significant talent, and every coach will tell you individual groups of players are different. No matter how highly touted they are, how an offensive line communicates is different. Some come together cohesive quicker than others. So we'll see with Auburn. They have a high ceiling, or they could be, they could fall off a little bit here. But A&M has a chance to move up the ladder. Mississippi's going through coaching changes. Mississippi State's going through coaching changes. Arkansas's in their darkest days. LSU, Auburn, with the exception of Alabama, there's no team personnel-wise for what they do that's in better shape than A&M is right now, at least from veteran experience standpoint. So I like them. You take a look at their schedule real quick. They, too, have that gauntlet to end the season at Alabama, home against LSU. Their whole division success may depend on those 2 games. In fact, I would probably say it does depend upon those 2 games. Non-conference, they've got it easy. Colorado, North Texas, Abilene Christian, not much there. And the crossovers are South Carolina and Vanderbilt. So schedule sets up for them as well. I mean, there's a lot of signals pointing towards Jimbo Fisher having a good year. I would say this, guys, if he doesn't have a good year this year, Texas A&M alumni, there'll be some rumblings, and they'll have to make some decisions. But he's got his talent, a schedule tailor-made for himself up until the end of the year. He's got all season to get ready for Alabama and LSU. Of course, he could get injured along the way, too. That's always a factor in this. But I like the way things set up for A&M.
All right, Ralph. Did Robbie kind of liking Texas A&M? Do you think this is the year they fulfill those kind of expectations?
Oh yeah, number 2 behind Alabama. They finish number 2. Let's look at last year. Toughest schedule in college football. They had to go to Clemson. They had to host Auburn. They had to host Alabama. They had to go to Georgia. They had to go to LSU. Okay, so what's different this year? Well, number 1, they don't play Clemson. Number 2, crossover games. They don't play Georgia. Their crossover games, the easiest crossover games in the entire division. At South Carolina and home against Vandy. That's a big difference. They play Auburn. What happens when they play Auburn? Yes, they have to go to Auburn, but Auburn the week before has to go to Georgia. A&M the week before host Fresno State. Huge difference having that non-conference game while Auburn is getting beat up in the trenches against the Georgia Bulldogs. I think they pull the upset there. I think their only loss is Alabama at the end of the year, 14.8. I bet them over the season win total. We'll see what happens with the cancellations. I look at them. I'm a Kellen Mond fan. I I don't think Jimbo Fisher's going anywhere. The way they emptied the Brinks truck, I don't know how many more Brinks trucks they have at A&M there, but their facilities now, they upgraded their facilities. They're as good as any in the league. The third year of the system, you have 12 of your top 15 returning tacklers back. You lost one guy to the NFL. That's it. You are loaded on both sides of the ball. So to me, I have them, I'm going to call for the upset at Auburn right now, and I'm going to call them to only lose one game. And, potentially they will be in the mix for a college playoff if there is a college playoff, because you lose one game and it's to Alabama and you're sitting at 11-1. There's going to have to be some impressive teams if you win all those games and you're 11-1 and your only loss is on the road at Bama, then you're going to have a powerful resume. Yeah, I think it's worth a shot for a national championship long shot bet. Yep.
Yeah. And Ralph, especially if, there was some show power there, in that game against Alabama, you give them a run, that there could be kind of that a little bit. You bring up the Brinks truck, I was looking, what's the price of oil here with the Texas A&M? Because, right, didn't they pay him like $75 million or something?
Yeah. And I think he's like the third highest or second highest. I think Dabo and I think he's the third highest paid coach behind Dabo and Saban. So, is he worth it? Well, he hasn't earned it yet. We'll see if he earns it this year. I think he does.
Good stuff there, Ralph. So you think that Texas A&M Alabama matchup towards the end of the season is the SEC West de facto championship game?
Yeah, I mean, granted, you're going to have to play Georgia or Florida, but it actually could be the SEC championship, not even the West. I mean, because I think if A&M does that and beats Alabama, beats Auburn, then they would be a favorite in the SEC championship game, because at that point they're going to have risen so high they'll be AP number 1 or 2. I don't think anyone's going to go undefeated, that they would be a favorite as well. So. To win the SEC is worth a look, and a national championship is worth a sprinkle or two.
All right, good stuff, Ralph. And guys, check out Ralph's packages at WagerTalk.com. Full season packages. Obviously knows his college football, NFL. You can get it all there. WagerTalk.com. Ralph Michaels' handicapper page, and Rob Veno. He's got his season win totals, MLB season win totals, 3 picks with analysis up right now, and it's also $2 Tuesday, guys. So check out the sites. You can get a play for just $2 right now. WagerTalk.com and SportsMemo.com. Guys, what everybody came for, the Egg Bowl talk here. The next 2 teams up, Mississippi State and Mississippi. We got Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin. It's been fun so far. It's even going to be more fun. This is something I'm really excited about this, guys. The Egg Bowl week, it's going to take front and center stage here, Ralph. We got Mississippi State up first last year, 6-6 regular season. 5-7 against the number. Also, I got them pinned at 6-6 over under team. But looks like Matt Luke out and Mike Leach in, Ralph. What are you thinking for the Mississippi State Bulldogs in 2020?
Well, let's look at last year. Last year, they were the number 24 recruiting class. They had 11 returning starters. They ended up going 3-5 in conference play, minus 41 yards per game, 6-7 overall against the number 7 schedule in the country, and they were plus 28 yards per game. This year, the number 27 recruiting class, so fell off a few points. You had a couple transfers because of Leach, so that's always something you have to worry about, because as Leach continues to open his mouth, there's times that he is filterless. So players take what he says to heart. Some of them, it affects them in a way where they needed to transfer, and they did. So this year, 12 returning starters. Again, you're talking about new OC and DC. Mike Leach has always called his own plays, which he will do here again. So, in reality, he is his own OC. But, I look at them and – how good is KJ Costello? Well, he was a solid starter at Stanford, but yet he couldn't win that job, and that's part of the reason he transferred. You look at the running game, Kalen Hill, is solid. You look at the receivers, I'm worried. You lose 4 of your top 5 receivers. Yes, Mike Leach is going to have a lot of receivers. There's going to be 6 guys that catch 50 passes, but you're still missing that experience without any spring practice in this new offense where you need the reps with KJ Costello. That concerns me. And on the defensive side, you lost 3 players to the NFL. You had 5 drafted overall, and you are missing 9 of your top 12 tacklers. So without even looking at positions, you are losing multiple guys. 2 of their DBs got drafted. Again, another concern. I think Mississippi State is going to fall back. Their schedule-wise, of their 12 games, I have them as a pick 'em in 1 game, a dog up to 9.5 in 4 games, and a double-digit dog in 2 games. So they're going to be a dog of 3 or more in 6 games this year. And I think Mike Leach struggles his first year there. I have them 6th, beating just Arkansas in the division this year.
All right, so possibly missing a bowl game here for the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Robbie, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think, Drew, that it's going to be a tough year for Mike Leach. I really do. I think that what he did offensively in Lubbock, Texas was really good. I think what he did in Pullman, Washington was really good, but I just don't think that the Big 12 or the Pac-12 bring combined talent to the table that the SEC does, and his quarterbacks, in my estimation, are going to be under duress a little bit here. He's going to have to really hone in on recruiting offensive linemen to work in his system. Let's go through it really quick here, guys. As Ralph mentioned, Mike Leach is going to call his own plays. Mike Leach runs an air raid system that really places a ton of emphasis on the quarterback at the line of scrimmage to make the right read and put the ball in the right receiver's hands. Unlike the comparison that we've talked about multiple times here, the run and shoot, where a quarterback drops back and receivers run option routes, they get to choose to run the open space. In the air raid, the receivers all run set patterns, and it's up to the QB to get them to the line quick and find the right guy. For Mississippi State, and again, Ralph hit on this, I'll just piggyback it a little bit. Mike Leach at Washington State last year, guys, had 8 wide receivers. This is an offense that needs a bulk, numbers in bulk at the wide receiver position. And Mississippi State does not have that. They have really never recruited that way. Dan Mullen didn't recruit that way. Joe Moorhead, while he is a fan of the vertical game as Leach is, he really didn't recruit that way. So I think Mississippi State in the recruiting game, again, they're going to offensive line. They're going to need receivers. KJ Costello's a nice transfer, but he's not all that mobile. And if that offensive line can't protect, I think this offense could be a disaster in year 1 until these guys figure it out. Again, 0 spring practices can't help any with on-field execution when you're making a switch from Joe Moorhead's offense to Mike Leach's offense. You could raise the question as a counter argument, guys. Well, how much worse could Mississippi State's offense be than what Joe Moorhead brought down, because it wasn't successful whatsoever, even though he's a really good offensive coordinator. I don't know, but Joe Moorhead didn't win at Mississippi State either. So first year, I think, could be tough offensively. And you would have liked, if there's a particular unit that suffers more from having no spring practices than the Mississippi State defense, then I don't know what it is in this conference. They bring in Zack Arnett. Interesting situation, guys. Zack Arnett is a Rocky Long disciple, runs the 3-3-5, but he actually accepted the Syracuse defensive coordinator position back in mid-January, stuck around for 11 days, and then came to join Mike Leach. Leach has had defensive coordinators run 3-3-5 before, but with no spring practice, there's just too many question marks here, because the 3-3-5, the switch over comes with position changes, as we always talk about. This was a 4-3 defense, 3-3-5. Guys are going to get swapped in and out, especially inside the front seven, have to learn new plays. And Zack Arnett himself said that he hoped in the first year that the defense would be so unique and difficult to prepare for that it would give them an advantage. With not a lot of time to get on-field execution, I don't know that helps whatsoever. Teams are going to get a chance to see this thing. Mississippi State might be blowing assignments all over the field once they get on the field in this defense. So it's just, to me, both sides of the football here are not in real good shape. His priority is to stop the run. It always was for Rocky Long. I don't see that changing, but I think there's difficulties on both sides of the football here, and I think Mississippi State has the potential. I mean, if Arkansas wasn't in this division, I think I'd rank Mississippi State last. Does live here, Mississippi State.
All right, we might have lost Robbie there, Ralph. But
he finished saying the same thing. If Arkansas wasn't in this division, he'd pick Mississippi State last. So, it's going to be so unique, Drew, because the SEC's never seen the air raid. The SEC's never seen the 3-3-5. But the problem is there's better athletes on the opposite side of the ball with both of those. I will say this. Mississippi State has a very good chance to start as a very fake team. They have New Mexico, a win. At NC State, that's a toss-up. They host Arkansas, a win. They host Tulane, a win. They could be 4-0 hosting Texas A&M and being only a small home dog.
Yeah.
To me, that has 5% sort of circled right now on the top of my head. Jimbo Fisher ready to roll in and only be a small away favorite, with Mississippi State being the very fake 4-0.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that, Ralph. 4-0 into that game. That might be Fade City. I will say this, though. The NC State game, like you emphasized, that they could drop that. And also Tulane. I mean, what Willie Fritz is able to do, they could drop that one, too.
They could. I have them as a 12-point favorite against Tulane. They are at home against Tulane. And they will have 2 games under their belt at that point. So, like I said, if I have someone marked as a 12-point favorite, in my mind, when I'm looking for scheduling spots, they're going to win that game.
Okay. Yeah. I'm with you. We got Ole Miss up next, Ralph?
Ole Miss next. Yep.
Okay. We got 4-8 last year is what I got them at. 7-5 ATS, 5-7 over under. The other half of this Egg Bowl here with Lane Kiffin and company. This is going to be an exciting one. It sounds like dark days in Starkville from both you and Robbie, and I'm with you guys. But you think there's any difference here with Oxford and Lane Kiffin coming in? 2 good quarterbacks, in my opinion, Ralph.
Yeah, I do. You look at Ole Miss last year. They were 2-6 in the SEC, 4-8 for the season. But, let's compare them to Mississippi State. Mississippi State was 3-5 in the SEC, minus 41 yards per game. Ole Miss was 2-6, minus 7 yards per game. That means they played like a 4-4 team. What happened? They lost a couple close games. Well, yeah, that makes a difference. They went out, they lost to Cal early. The Auburn loss wasn't bad. They were in it early against LSU. They lost to Arkansas by 1. That was a loss you don't want to have. And I do want to make a correction, Drew, and I apologize. When we were talking about the Texas A&M D-line, I had the Mississippi guys in my head. I was looking at the Mississippi depth chart. So I misspoke earlier when I talked about the senior D-line, and I mentioned I mentioned a couple players. I mentioned Anderson and Tisdale. Those are Mississippi's defensive starters on the end. So, to me, I like this team. I think they're quite a bit better than Mississippi State. In my power ratings, as I look at the numbers, I have them 5 points better than Mississippi State right now. You didn't lose any players to the draft, so you're set. Last year, Mississippi, 11.9 returning starters. This year, 13. But you're number 35 in experience. Yes, you have a new head coach. I wasn't a Lane Kiffin fan, but to me right now, what he did at FAU, I have to give him credit. Again, you can't hold grudges in the betting industry just because you didn't like a guy. And what he showed me was, yes, he could take a team and make them an excellent team with what FAU did. So can he take it to the next level? Well, I'm not going to jump on his bandwagon yet, but I'm not going to throw him under the bus. I'm going to give him a benefit of the doubt. Remember, he had a raw deal at USC. His record was much better than he thought. He had a raw record at Tennessee. Hell, I think he went 7-6. They would have taken that each of the last 6 years. So, be careful what you wish for. So, he has that big time coaching experience. We know he has the karma and the presence to handle the SEC coaches. I look at him back and, the question is going to be Matt Carroll. Well, 59% last year, a 6-3 ratio. Obviously, they played Plumlee as well. Plumlee was so exciting running the ball, 1,000 yards rushing. So who gets the job? Well, again, it is Lane Kiffin. So while the job is still in question and Plumlee was incredible, I think it's going to go to Coral. Your top 2 rushers are back. 5 of your top 6 receivers are back. 4 of your top 5 tacklers are back, and 9 of your top 15 are back. I like the way the schedule plays out. You've got a break before Auburn. You do play Auburn, LSU, Alabama in that stretch. You're probably going to go 0-3. So to me, the whole season hinges on this. If you beat Baylor and Southeast Missouri and you're 2 wins and then you lose those 3, can you keep their confidence to knock off Vanderbilt, Connecticut, Arkansas, Georgia Southern, and Mississippi State on the win back? Plenty of winnable games, much better than Mississippi State. But how they come out of a 3-game stretch, September 19th to the October 3rd, probably one of the most brutal 3-game stretches in all of college football.
Yeah, that's a rough one. Keep him motivated. I think he will be. Robbie, coming to you, and I think we got everything back in order here. Ralph talked about what he was able to do and not hold a grudge against Lane Kiffin, and we've talked about this before. I knew it was going to have to be a pretty good job for him to leave. He was down there in Boca Raton making $1 million a year, and he would actually. One thing I loved about it was I always love watching the coaches shows, Ralph, and he would take his boat to a Duffy's there in Boca and do his coach's show at a restaurant there. And I was like, man, that's a pretty good setup down there in South Florida. I don't know if he's ever going to leave, Ralph.
Yeah. Well, the SEC and $5 million is a reason to leave, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so now he finds himself here in Oxford, Robbie. I mean, do you see him coming out with a spark? And do you see Ole Miss, there's a path here. Do you think they make a bowl game? Robbie, we don't have the volume here, man. Not sure if maybe you could turn on the mic, something like that, real quick. Well, let us know if you get it figured out, Robbie. Ralph, I guess we can move on to Arkansas here. I got them 0-8 in conference last year, 2-10 overall, 4-8 ATS, 5-7 towards the under. We do have a couple minutes left here for the show, so. Arkansas, I mean, you guys mentioned it before. I'm with you. Fayetteville, it's the darkest days I can remember for an Arkansas fan. And one thing I took note of when Texas A&M joined the SEC, that was the worst thing that could have happened for Arkansas, Ralph, because it killed the recruiting in the state of Texas. And it's showing in wins and losses now. I mean, 2-10 last year. These are rough times for Arkansas, man. What are you thinking for the Razorbacks in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, let's remember a few years ago, they thought they were they hired Bielema from Wisconsin and they go to 3 straight bowls and then he falls off and then, a disastrous hire the last few years. I'm not a fan. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go back to my Phil Steele days when we were prepping and we talked to, oh my God, I just went brain dead. The Dallas Cowboy GM, Gil Brandt. We talked to Gil Brandt, and Gil Brandt said, I would never hire an offensive lineman as a head coach. And I go back and I look and I can't think of very many head coaches that were offensive line coaches are good. And that's exactly what Sam Pittman was from Georgia. He had never been an OC. He had never been a DC. He was the offensive line coach here from 13 to 16. but he doesn't hire a head coach with experience on the OC and Kendall Briles. I'm not a fan of that. Yeah, Kendall Briles looked good a couple years ago, but all he's done is 1 year at Florida Atlantic with Kiffin, 1 year at Houston, didn't impress me. 1 year at Florida State didn't impress me. So you got a guy who was good a long time ago in a system that worked in some places. Now, is that going to work? I don't know. I do like Barry Odom as the DC. Of course, he was the head coach at Missouri. So it does give him one head coach in the mix. But, Arkansas has lost 19 straight SEC games. Can they win a game this year? Well, maybe they beat Mississippi. Besides that, you're talking about a team that last season was number 23 in recruiting with 11 starters back. They fell back to 30 in recruiting. And yes, they do have 14 starters back, which is second most in the conference, but they were minus 179 yards per game in the SEC. So think about as good as LSU was. LSU was only plus 175. Arkansas 0-8, minus 179. To make up 179 yards per game in your conference, that's just going to be astronomical. They may win one game in conference play. You're looking at crossover games. They host Tennessee. They go to Missouri. I have them both as losses. You're going to beat Georgia State. You're going to beat UT Martin. You're going to beat Kent State. You're going to win 3 conference games this year, maybe one more. They're multiple years away before I even can get them up out of the basement in the SEC West.
Right. And it's one of those things for Arkansas to move up. Somebody's got to move down. That's one of the tougher things in the SEC West, Ralph. What they haven't won an SEC game since 2017. We got Ryan saying that in the chat box. I mean, but if they're able to put together multiple top 30 recruiting classes year after year, you'd have to think at some point that's going to translate to wins and possibly to a bowl game here, right?
Well, every team last year in the SEC was in the 30s in recruiting except Vanderbilt. This year, 12 of the 14 teams are in the 30s. So being in the 30s doesn't get you close enough because so many people are in the top 10s. Right. You look at LSU 2, Alabama 2, Auburn 7, A&M 6. So when you have 4 of the top 7 in the country in your division, that's why you have the toughest conference schedule in all of football, because you're playing your 6 conf division foes and you're playing Tennessee and you're going to Missouri. You have no breaks in your conference schedule. Again, Mississippi State, the best chance for them to break that conference streak. So 19 straight going in. They actually played Mississippi State on the road in the opener in the SEC. So if they don't get them then let's add 8 more losses in there, and they're going to finish the season with 27 straight.
Ralph, let's end it with this. Over under a half of SEC win for Arkansas this year. Would you bet the over or the under?
Well, I would bet under. I would bet winless because I have them. I have them as a 11-point underdog at Mississippi State.
Okay. And
that's your best chance. That's your best chance to win.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go to the rest of the SEC West there. But, man, Ralph, always fun. Sorry, guys, about the technical difficulties there with Robbie Veno, but we'll get his thoughts on Mississippi and Arkansas as we talk about the East at the top. Next Tuesday, same time, same place, guys. Stay safe. Remember to wash your hands. Ralph, anything here before we shut this down?
Nope. Hey, check out Robbie's win totals. I love it. I read the report religiously every year. So certainly worth the price. WagerTalk.com.
WagerTalk.com. Guys, be safe. Talk to you next week.